Welcome everyone to the Overview and Scrutiny panel, Environment, Communities and Partnerships. We start with the agenda. Have we got any apologies? I don't think we have we? No apologies. Thank you everyone that they came this evening, particularly in this weather. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes and they're happy with the minutes? We've had, oh yeah.
So just to add on the minutes, there is going to be a correction to the third paragraph of minute 2325, which should actually read Councillor Criswell and not Councillor Corley, who had given his apologies for the meeting. So apologies for that error, but that will be corrected on the next set of minutes.
So other than that correction, is everyone happy with the minutes? Thank you. So item number 2, responses to questions arriving from our previous meeting. Is everyone happy with those responses? I think one of them was for Councillor Alban. Are you happy with that response?
It's the Roman legislating plan.
It's what, sorry? Yes, thank you, Chair. I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. Whilst that was useful, and I understand that this is going to delegated powers, what I wanted to do was to get a presentation so we could all get an update on what local lettings plans are and now why they go to delegation. I know I've got one in my ward and I've been working with officers to achieve that. And I think it would be good for us all to know, in case it comes up in our ward, how we can make a difference and contribute and what it means for our communities.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. We shall be looking at that. Thank you. So item number 3, members' interest. Has anyone got a declaration of interest? No? That's fine, thank you. So moving on to item 4, our working programme. Has everyone had a chance to look at it? Anyone got any questions or got any comments on it? Councillor Shaw.
Just a small comment. I know I wasn't present at the meeting last month. I just wanted to say I thought the layout was a lot better with the dates. It's a lot easier to see forthcoming items on the agenda. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Shaw.
Councillor Alban would like to.
Councillor Alban.
Thanks again, Chair. On the environment, a climate change working group that you are on, Councillor Hunt, Councillor Shaw, and yeah, we know who we're on against. Councillor Lowe. Just on the future things, we've been about 18 months, nearly 2 years. The group's been up and running. We've looked at one thing on e-cigarettes, which was fine, which was driven by us, and we spent a fair bit of time looking at the EV strategy, which is great. But I know there's been lots of other things that we've all presented across the different political groups here that we want to look into. And I think it'd be good, as you and I have discussed, to push those forward, because one of the key things is that this is backbench driven, that we can think outside the box that officers and the executive might not have already thought of.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. I'm sure we'll have another meeting soon and set something up. Thank you. And there was one other councillor, Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair. I've warmed up, so I've taken my scarf off now. I was something I'd like us to add, if we could. I was intrigued by the recent press release on the council's scoring on the CE UK questionnaire. Thank you. I'd really love to learn a bit more, and I wondered if we could ask the Executive Council at some stage to come and present that to us so we can understand what lies behind that. And obviously our score was what it was, and I'm sure there's a plan to get us further up there amongst our peers. So I think it'd be really interesting. I'd like to hear more about that, if that's something we could put in our work plan, perhaps.
Thank you. Got that noted. Thank you. So any other questions about the working programme? No. So we're now going to slightly move our agenda item round. So we're now going to move the agenda item 8, A14 tree planting, now into agenda 5. Martin, the reason for this is Martin, who's going to present to us, has got away to travel. So we just thought we'd move the agenda item round. Is everyone happy with that? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along and thanks for inviting me along to discuss predominantly the replanting strategy for the A14, but I'm sure there'll be other questions as we progress throughout the evening. Just a little bit of a background for myself. I've been with National Highways for, good grief, 34 years now. So I have previous experience of a number of fairly famous, shall we say, Newbury bypass has been one of them, and I was responsible for having to deal with the likes of Swampy back in the day. But I think things have moved on quite considerably since sort of the 80s. Happy to answer any questions that you may have as we move along. I think it's probably best if I do slide by slide, and then I can stop and you can ask some questions and move on from there. Happy to move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll give you a bit of a potted history. I think lots of you will be aware of the difficulties that we had with the A14 planting historically, and I'll give you warts and all history. To be honest, we are where we are, and I probably want to spend the next sort of 20 minutes or so just discussing what we're doing moving forward to improve the current situation. Seems such a long time ago, actually, that the main route of the A14 was open, nearly 4 years ago. All the trees, in fairness, were planted in the right season. And we have circa 850,000 plants that have been planted right across the project. Just to be aware that around about 40,000 of those actually will be under the care of Cambridge County Council. We held 2 surveys in subsequent years, actually, dare I say, during the warm period. And what became very clear is that we were suffering from a much higher failure rate on our replanting across the project. To give you an idea, every project that National Highways runs, we expect in the first year to actually have quite a high failure rate of about 20 to 25%, but that's not abnormal. But I think it's probably fair to say that we were probably running at somewhere in the region of about 40 to 50% failure rate. So there was clearly some alarm bells ringing from our perspective. Sorry, next slide. Thank you. So I came on board as project manager for the whole of the A14 around about two years ago. And the first thing that was put in front of my desk was, what are we going to do about the replanting and the current failure rate? Now, as you'll be aware, our guide, our Bible, is the development consent order. The development consent order, I have to be honest, isn't particularly helpful because the guidance it gives is that if there's a tree failure, you go back there and broadly plant the same tree in the same area and frankly keep your fingers crossed. And we'd done that on 2 occasions. What became very clear is that we couldn't carry on doing exactly the same as we'd previously been doing because the odds are we would have another failure on our hands. So at that point, we stopped what we were planning to do, which frankly was a third lot of replanting. And we kind of did a bit of a review about where we were and what we could do to do things better. The first thing that we wanted to do is take some soil samples right across the project. And there is some line of thought that actually, generally speaking, the soil samples right across the project are broadly of a similar quality. So there was never any areas across the project where we thought the soil was particularly bad. But what we did start to understand was that certain species were certainly growing and improving far more than others. And in particular, you may have seen that Scotch pine does seem to have been one of those plants that has always been quite robust over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. So we looked at, like I say, soil samples, we looked at the species that we were working with. And in fact, the DCO does also provide you with the guidance of what type of species that should be used. So we had the parameters, but we wanted to kind of start to move them around to better understand what was happening. Now, we undertook a survey which started in July, actually, and lasted three months. And I'll go on to explain a little bit more about this particular survey that we've undertaken recently. The survey is the first that has been done literally plant by plant. So we've had people going out there and literally looking down the plastic tubes and understanding exactly what's going. Previous surveys were done on samples, so they would probably take about 15, 20 plants from an area, look at those, and then have a conclusion about what the potential problems were. But this. All right. Okay. No problem. No problem. So so not only did we agree to undertake a full survey and a really detailed survey, but we started to look at when is the best time to start planting. I don't know if you know, but actually from pretty much now through to March is the optimum time for planting. It is probably fair to say that previous planting regimes had taken place throughout the year. Now, there were a number of factors behind that. Mainly, I have to say, is during construction time, there was a request from number 10 that the road was opened early, and so therefore things like planting, which would have necessarily been undertaken in October, were brought forward to spring. That did such as life, that also did seem to work straight into the areas of some hot summers that subsequently took place as a result of that. But again, I'll come on to explain why a plant and the time that it is planted is actually quite critical for its survival. Through all of this point, we were liaising with the county council, local authorities. I think at the time, in fairness, Huntingdon District Council didn't have a landscaper in place, but we were working with other local district councils to get feedback on local issues that they may have had. We're able to move the slide on. So just to be aware, the survey was a full survey all the way from Alconbury all through to Milton, which is the full length of the project. This time we also included plants which would come under the final ownership of the County Council's Highway Authority. Just to be aware, we do have, as you may be aware, a number of borough pits, which are very large areas of land which we've actually taken earth from for construction to minimize HGV movements during construction, and they have subsequently been, are, for want of a better word, I guess, large ponds with water, and there's one up at Brampton, which you've probably been aware of. So we have excluded those areas because they have aquatic species which seem to be doing quite well. And you need to understand that actually there are also a number of bulbs which were planted. So there was always a figure being bandied around of 850,000 plants that were planted on the project. That's not strictly true because they weren't necessarily plants, but they were bulbs as well. So I know that there was some publicity that I was involved with in March that was saying that 850 plants were planted and that there was a significant failure rate. Wasn't strictly true. Wasn't strictly true. Before we go into sort of the survey results, what we did identify was a number of small areas which would become really difficult to maintain, predominantly because they would have been areas in central reservation. Part of the previous planting meant that the planting, as I said, was kind of brought forward, and some of the planting took place before the road was actually opened. Hindsight's a great thing, but now what's become very clear is that those areas become quite expensive to maintain and also come with a significant health and safety risk to road workers. And potentially it would also mean that we would have to put lane closures in place. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but causing a significant delay on the A14 while we're maintaining 24 plants in a central reservation doesn't sound like a good perspective from a customer perspective. And like I said, there was always the health and safety concerns as well. Having said that, those areas, as I said, are around about 1,200 plants. Will be redistributed to other areas on the project. And again, I can come on to that later. Just want to move on. So as I said, this is the most thorough planting of the A14 project to date, review. All of them were inspected individually. I don't know if anybody's actually been out there, but for those plants that we have deemed to be not successful, there's a little green dot, which is actually on the white plastic. So if you ever see a green dot out there on a piece of plastic, that means that plant has officially failed. Took 3 months to undertake because it was a significant undertaking. But what it did is it gave us a really, really definitive, clear idea of those plants that had failed. As a result of that, we have now identified 165,000 plants that need replacing. I haven't deliberately provided you with a percentage of what that is of the overall. What we found out is that there are so many baselines that you could work this from that you could get to quite a wide percentage. So if I were to go, some of the, in fairness, in the press, use that 850,000 as a marker point, as a baseline, and then said, in their view, 500,000 had perished. So therefore, we were getting about the 40, 50%. Having said that, if you want to take the bulbs away and the other plants that we talked about, you could say that we're probably looking at about a 25% failure rate currently. But then if you want to include the 850, then we can suddenly turn around and go, well, actually, we've got a marvelous, like sort of, 10, 15% failure rate. So I think it's really keen that we get away from the percentage numbers, actually looking at the facts about what we have discovered. And you have to bear in mind that we're not comparing like for like, because this is a full survey that's looked at all the planting, whereas previous ones were just sample surveys. So the process of the count and the data that we received was received on a very different basis. But what we do know, and again, I'll go on to discuss why, that to be honest, it was probably a far better survival rate than we'd thought, only because we'd come out of two very, very warm summers. I think it's probably not just in Cambridgeshire, but right across the country. That hot weather had resulted in even mature trees suffering due to that warm weather and not surviving. So it's probably fair to say that we were pleasantly surprised, but I'll come on to explain why that actually occurred. Okay, go to the next slide. So I just want to sort of go on through the sort of the lessons learned and how we are now doing things differently moving forward. As I said, now we have the more accurate data, so we know exactly the individual saplings that have been inspected. We also know the species of those species which have been less successful than previously. And I've said that was quite fundamental because, like I say, now we were looking at particular species and not just taking sample results. One thing that we have discovered, and I'll be honest, there needs to be more research into this because this is something that's quite new to not only the project but actually the National Highways itself, is that there was always, when they took an initial view of looking down the white plastic tubes, it's probably fair to say that the inspection there suggested that there'd been a fatality rate. The issue was that during the summer periods, a lot of the plants were actually taking their resource, for want of a better word, and were concentrating on growth below ground and root structure. So on the surface, frankly, it didn't look great, but underneath, there was some really good root establishment. Now, there had been some specialists who had suggested, don't panic, it's going to look poor for the first 18 to 2 years, but then they will start to develop. There were some reasons why that didn't completely happen, and in particular, a bare root planting factor. But there's also some further studies that need to take place because we believe that potentially, and like I say, we need to look at this further, that plants also survive better with long grass. Now, some of our maintenance regimes historically, partially under public pressure, and I absolutely understand why, would mean that we do quite a few grass cuts. Grass cuts on our highway are excellent because one thing it does do is it identifies the litter that's been left behind and we can clear that up. The flip side to that is that once you're constantly cutting grass, you're taking away the potential for saplings to gain moisture. And what we believe is happening is that if you keep the grass uncut, although obviously you need to cut it for health and safety reasons, if it covers signs, etc., the longer grass was starting to protect the plants from the sunlight, and more to the point, we're starting to collect moisture to feed the plants. And we think that may, and I say may because we've got to do some more research into this, have contributed to the better survival rate during the latest survey. If we can just go on to the next slide. Some of you may have seen this previously, but I just want to spend a little bit of time on this because this is one of the fundamental changes that we've taken place on the project. There are broadly two types of plant. There's what we call cell-grown and bare root. It's probably fair to say that previously bare root plants were cheaper than cell-grown plants. Now the cost is very marginal. Yes, cell-grown is fractionally more, but it's very worth investing in the cell-grown plants for two reasons. First of all, with cell-grown, it keeps the structure of the root in soil. So it always has a far better rate of survival. Bare root is exactly what it says on the tin. It is bare root with no soil. The trouble that we had, and this is again a lessons learned, is the trouble with the bare root is that as soon as it leaves the nursery, it starts to decline in its health. And what we did find, to be honest, is that if you then start leaving bare root plants in a depot ready to be planted, by the time they are eventually planted, they are not in a healthy state. So now predominantly all our plants will be cell grown, and that means that they come within the soil and they are far more robust as far as their long-term future is concerned. I don't know if there's any questions about that at that juncture. Sorry.
Thank you. It was actually, I suspect it's probably about the cell grown. I noticed, I go backwards and forwards to Bedford a fair amount, and I noticed that some of the new plants they've planted there have got almost like green bags around them. Would they be cell grown plants, presumably? Yeah. Okay.
They're planted slightly differently, but yes, broadly the concept is the same.
Yes, Collie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a point you made, obviously, a couple of hot summers. We know the climate is changing. We know it's only going to get hotter and hotter. And I know that we will always want to try and replace with native species, but is there any consideration around us looking at, or sorry, you looking at more drought-resistant species, species that will probably thrive and survive in what is going to be a warmer climate generally?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to bear in mind that the development consent order was granted, I think, back in 2019, where maybe the public perception and indeed sort of knowledge on climate change probably wasn't as great as it is now. And actually, the DCO did require that local species were used. So to a degree, the DCO is my Bible, and we're still stuck with that requirement. However, moving forward, yes, I think you're absolutely right that the national highways are now looking at a better understanding which species will be more resilient to climate change. So I just wanted to come on. This is something that's actually only been discussed over the last 2 or 3 months regarding tree guards. I think we're all familiar with the white plastic tree guards, which are out there on the A14. My personal view is I detest them. I think they look ugly. They're not particularly environmentally friendly. They need to be removed by workforce. And again, whenever there's workforce out on the network, there's health and safety concerns for them. They were used back in the time broadly because when we spoke to the likes of Forestry Commission, they said this was really the only product out there that was robust enough to be able to undertake the work required. Um, like I say, we are where we are. However, a decision was made about 3 months ago that we would not be using any future plastic tubes on the A14. No plastic whatsoever. That means tree guards that there are about 4 or 5 on the market. Plenty of them say that they are biodegradable, but plenty of them come with biodegradable plastic. And we've even decided not to go down that route because, frankly, I think at the end of the day, the plastics are still going into the soil. So, in my world, it really defeats the object. So we've made the decision, and I've got a sample here, which I'm happy to hand around, to go for the country's first ever completely non-plastic biodegradable tree sleeve. This is the only product in the country currently. The company so far have produced, their biggest order previously was for 10,000. Do you want to hand it round while I'm speaking? We've ordered 165,000. The company said that they're able to provide that. Now, what's quite good, and I'll be again honest with you, I thought, will I be setting some hairs running here across the company, and everyone's going to be having to be committed to use these moving forward? But the reality is that National Highways have what we call a Series 63000 landscape guidance, and this new tree guard will be now used across the whole of National Highways in future. So yeah, I guess it's for other manufacturers to catch up and use something similar. It's predominantly wood, resin, with other biodegradable materials in it. You'll be pleased to say that mice, voles, rabbits, hares, as it says there, and deer don't find it. They do look quite tasty, I have to say, but apparently no, it's not a problem as far as that's concerned. That's just a sample. They do come much bigger. To give you an idea of cost, a plastic standard tube comes in at around about £1.15. They do retail for about £2.50, but we managed to get the price down to around about the £2.15 mark. So it's £1 more to use these tubes. So that's an extra investment for ourselves of sort of around about £350,000. But I think the investment is very well worth undertaking and doing. Next slide. Thank you. Sorry. Sure.
Interesting. So, can you just explain to me? Normally, a plastic tree guard would last what? How long? And how long will this last? I guess in comparison.
Generally speaking, 5 years. We've been told that they will last 5 years, which is comparable to plastic tree guards. One of the things that we noticed is that we had previously taken a line that we had 165,000 plastic guards, which if we could reuse them would be a good use of taxpayers' money, because we just didn't want to just bin them. However, when we started looking at them, we realized that they become incredibly brittle. A lot of them had already been there for 2 or 3 years, and they weren't up to the job required. So again, it was a like I say, from my perspective, a non-brainer. And of course, there are other benefits because, as I said, it means that they will disappear of their own accord. So there won't be a lifetime of seeing old white tubes hanging around when they shouldn't be. And obviously, from our road worker perspective, they now don't have to go back out on the network and remove them and cause any issues regarding traffic management.
Councillor Auburn, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's about exactly that point, because I was racking through my emails trying to find one where I was told exactly what you just said about the use of plastic and the idea that they were reused, and I accepted that's what was the policy at the time. I think I raised this just shortly after the new A14 opened, so I'm really pleased that the policy has changed and we're looking at something more environmentally friendly.
Actually, it comes as a long-term saving, because the one thing that does cost a lot of money is the manpower to remove the tubes in the first place. Recycling them, I can get 165,000 tubes recycled for about £10,000. That's not a big issue, but the cost of getting the workforce out there to remove them is quite significant. I just wanted to also mention the use of fertilizers, which is again a different approach to previously. Historically, the plants would have been put in, and then we'd have someone go around with a spray and then spray fertilizer across each individual plant. Again, fairly intense labour to do that. There are issues, although all the fertilizer sprays that we use are the correct and authorized types of material, it still involves spraying fertilizer, which again is leave individuals to decide whether that's a good or a bad thing. So what we've made the choice is actually when we plant the saplings, we're going to include a new fertilizer whilst it's being planted. Relatively new product, although it has been around for a little while. It's something that we haven't used, and it comes back to, I think, when you said on the someone said on the A1 that they'd seen these bags as well as part of that process. What really helps with this particular type of fertilizer is it retains the moisture, particularly over the first 12 months of the plant's growth. And to be honest, the first 12 months is the most critical period. When some of the planting was put in during the summer, I'll be honest, when you have 850,000 plants, it's difficult to water all of them. So to a degree, you are relying on Mother Nature to do their thing. Clearly, we had 2 hot summers, and that didn't quite work out. But I think by choosing a October to March planting season, and we did get a little bit of criticism, in fairness, about why have you delayed the replanting until sort of this time of year. But like I say, it will help with retaining that moisture, which is another benefit. Next slide. It was quite interesting because when we first had to look at the number of plants that we had to order back in December of last year, we went to the nurseries, and I don't know if you know, but there is a national shortage of saplings in the country. So we said, what kind of number can you guarantee for October? And this was back in November. And they did say we can guarantee 162,000 plants. Now, trust me, this is purely by coincidence. The figure that we found out that need replacing were 165,000. So we were remarkably close to that figure. However, I must say that our initial order of 162,000, we thought we would have to order substantially more trees at the time. But what we wanted to know from the nurseries is when we came to this specific October period, what can you guarantee, what you can deliver? Because the worst thing we wanted to do is get to October and find that we were really struggling to get the plant supplies. So they gave us that figure back in December. And we are currently in the process of collecting these plants from the various nurseries that we've ordered, because there's different species, and then we are bringing them all to a holding nursery a mile away from the A14. Now, one of the reasons why I've done this is I come back to the fact that a plant which is left not planted is a plant that will always start to deteriorate. So I've kind of used the expression kind of just in time logistics is what we want to do. Is a bit like you see those adverts for peas when they sort of like go from the farm into the shop within 24 hours. We are looking to get the plants from the nursery into the ground within 24 hours. So there is a logistical commitment there, which we're having to undertake. But I think it's really important that the plant has the minimum time when it's not in the earth. We've touched on this before. All the planting that we are undertaking is subject to a 5-year maintenance period as well. So the project, the DCO commitment for myself technically finishes the end of next year. but we've given a commitment that it won't be a 2-year maintenance, it will be the 5-year. And in fairness, 5-year is the Series 3000 guidance that National Highways uses anyway. Needless to say, lessons learned. We've already been up and down the country to various projects, and you'll no doubt of our neighbours down on the A428, a number of lessons learned with them regarding this replanting and making sure that they take a very similar approach. I was asked to do various other lessons learned. Yesterday I was contacted by the A66, which I think is somewhat further up north than here, to again do another lessons learned on what we've adopted here. And like I say, a lot of this will be incorporated into our ongoing replanting across national highways. One thing that I was also critically aware, and maybe it was an opportunity missed back in the day, is, and I have to say this is a personal view, not a company view, is I think replanting, sometimes we look at replanting as we see a large embankment and we like to replant on it. What kind of benefit does that bring to local communities? I would just say question mark. So certainly with a lot of this replanting that we're currently looking at, we are looking to see where we can add further benefit and enhance areas where we always have planting in the local communities. So that is not doing anything different to what the DCO says. It just means that where there's the opportunity to do more in these areas, we will do so. And I'll come on to another initiative which Councillor Devonport-Ray is already engaged with moving forward. We need to try and better understand in future projects where our planting can bring better outcomes to local communities. And that's kind of a bit of a sweeping statement. But the things I'm kind of thinking about is where in future can we put planting within local communities where you can get local community engagement with that planting. We'll be around there. We've given a 5-year commitment to undertake this maintenance. After 5 years, frankly, we will move on. So what we're looking to do is finding out where we can get local communities to continue to gain the benefits from the long-term growth of these trees. And we've had some successes, small successes, I grant you, up at the other end of the project, up at Impington, where we've actually helped them develop a butterfly park and also to provide better facilities for bats. And so what we've done is we've given them the planting, we've helped them with some of the maintenance. In fairness, they did the vast majority of themselves, but as a result, they are now developing their own long-term woodland plan, which the local communities are completely bought into. So again, it's something that we just need to better understand about where we plant and more importantly, why we plant it there. So that's why just the final issue there just says refocus on better outcomes for local communities. Just a couple more slides, if you please know. One of our new National Highways Engagement Environmental Plan is actually to reflect on that, is actually to say we need to better understand. I won't read it out because, sorry, if you move on to the next slide, sorry. I won't read it out, but it is actually providing enhancing urban and rural environments. Now, one of the things, this is not to be aware, this is not, I can't take the credit for this because this is not a project-led initiative, but as a result of the need to better enhance local environments, National Highways have committed to plant 3 million trees by 2030. And that is on top of our commitment that we are giving to our own projects. So these are trees that National Highways want to plant in local communities. And some may say, oh, is that for carbon offset that we can capture? No, we're not taking the carbon capture for that offset capture. That can go to local authorities, local communities, etc., to do as they wish, depending on what their local environmental targets are. So that's something which, like I say, we've started. It's a long process because I've already said it's not just a case of saying we would like some plants in this community and then we turn up the next day and plant them, because we've got issues about what kind of plants, what kind of future do you think would be ideal for that local community. And then, of course, we've got to go away and order those plants, which we know took us at least 9 months to get the right plants, admittedly on larger numbers. But I think this is something that I'm certainly championing for the route along the A14, partially to kind of accept that there is more that we could potentially do for local communities regarding planting. Like I say, it's not an A14 initiative, but it's something that I picked up with National Highways and we're currently running with. Next slide, please. So this is the kind of the future timeline. My last slide. We've started now. Ironically, we have people already out there removing the white plastic tubes. I'll be honest and say a month ago we thought it would be way too dry to start the replanting. 4 weeks later, we're now in a situation where it's far too wet to do planting. But I'm sure we are due to start the planting itself in the next couple of weeks. We have kind of a rota of maintenance, grass cutting, removing plastic tubes, and then putting in the new 100. Like I said, we've got 162,000, but we will order the remaining plants. I should add that some of those remaining plants we're also taking a selection of mature trees as well. So where we know that some communities have said, quite happy with the replanting, but is there any chance you could put some mature trees in there to do a little bit more? So actually, some of those 3,000 plants, we will be ordering mature trees to address that issue. Further planting will continue through till March and beyond, depending on weather conditions. It is our anticipation that by 2025, we will hand over the planting to National Highways Operations Directorate, so they undertake the long-term maintenance of the structure once we've handed it over, and obviously over to Cambridgeshire County Council for them to undertake. And like I say, that's due for 2025. So that's my presentation. Any question? Should we do some questions on planting? And then I'm sure you may have a couple of other questions on other parts of the A14, which I'm happy to answer if I can.
Thank you. On there it says obviously the planting season starting now. When are the new tubes going to be rolled up? Have you got them? And you and are they going to be used on the Black Cat to Caxton Gibbet project? Are you aware, or
Pushing it on. The company is currently revising its guidance for landscaping, which we called Series 3000. These tubes will be part of that new guidance, and it's my understanding that A428 will be following the guidance as stipulated by the company. So at this stage, there's nothing to suggest that they won't be using those. It's I would assume that they would be, because we all follow the same guidance.
Councillor Burke?
Thank you. I firstly just wanted to say that it's great that you're learning from this and sharing that across. 165,000 plants is quite significant. Who's picking up the cost for that?
We had an overall budget of 4 million for planting. So we have spent to date 2 million, and I have a further £2 million to undertake this replanting. We have not gone back to DFT and asked for further funding for this. This was all in the original project budget.
I actually have a question myself. Curious to know, your plant by plant survey, how did that compare to a sample survey in terms of the data you got? Would the sample survey be far out, or was it quite kind of similar?
I think the answer to that is, if I'm honest, we'll never know, because it was purely a sample survey, so it's very difficult to get accurate data. What we were very keen to do is gain accurate data. It did take 3 months to undertake that, and it was labour intensive and fairly costly, dare I say. But it meant that we had really clear data of what we were dealing with previously. Samples are purely that. So you're never quite sure of exactly what you're dealing with. And of course, one of the other advantages of being able to visually inspect each plant is then you could also look at the species involved. And so you have a better idea of not only just standard numbers, but which species were improving better than others, which did have an impact on what we're actually planning to plant. We'd already made the decision to go, before we did the survey, we'd already made the decision to go down more of the cell-grown plants because we knew they were more robust and would have a more likely rate of survival. But it also meant that we could also look, I'll be honest with you, the majority of cell-grown plants were the likes of the most popular species that we were using. Previously, we hadn't used them because there was quite a significant cost difference, but like I say, now it's negligible.
I've got one other question as well. When you, in the central reservation, I can completely understand you wouldn't want to put planting there because of the issues that you mentioned. Is there any downside to not having planting there?
There, obviously, within the original design, there was a need for planting to be there. But my view, I'm afraid, is that health and safety always comes first. So yes, there would be we're looking where possible to maybe put in some wildflower seed in there because it wouldn't need to be maintained. But I think the overall view is, like I say, the areas were small. It wasn't great areas. And my personal view is that if you're dealing with a relatively small number of trees, then road worker and road user safety, I'm afraid, out trumps the maintenance of the tree. I mean, obviously, as a previous design, they were there for a reason, but we are reusing those plants elsewhere, so it's not as though there's a loss in planting.
Have we had any other questions? Oh, Councillor Shaw?
Thank you. You mentioned obviously community engagement. How would one go about engaging with highways if the local community wanted to develop an area within their boundary?
We're still at a very early stage. Like I say, it's not something that my colleagues in National Highways are involved with. What I found, frankly, quite refreshing is that there weren't that many limitations, because my assumption would be, okay, we've got 3 million plants. Does that mean they've got to be planted on the A14 route? And the answer is no, absolutely not, because actually your DCO requirement already covers that. These are areas which don't necessarily have to be. It's always nice. It's always nice if it's close to one of our projects, but the criteria isn't that it must be within 2 miles of the project. So it's very much an open invitation for all communities. At this stage, they've just developed a kind of bit of a questionnaire, which I'm more than happy to share the link to others. Where and it is very, at this stage, it's very broad. It kind of says, what would your proposals be? What would you like to see? Where would you like to see it? And then they will go back and review that, and I'm sure they will get applications across the country to review that and then take that forward. So I can't guarantee to you that every application that goes forward will get a number of plants that are able to grow. What I can say, and I hope Councillor Denport-Ray will back me up on this, is that I'm trying to champion this on behalf of communities along the A14. So the advantage that we have maybe is that I'm kind of chomping at the bit and a kind of one of the first project managers to actually engage with this section of the company to make that happen.
Councillor Davenport-Ray, did you have a question?
Councillor Shaw slightly beat me to it. Similar question. Yes, Martin, if you could let us know what that questionnaire is, I hope that we would all go away to all the communities that we represent and encourage them to participate when there's the opportunity for so many free plants, not just trees, but we've talked about wildflowers and other types of plants. So specifically where they are, what is the most suitable planting? I think it's a great opportunity.
Councillor Orban?
Thank you, Chair. Just on clarification, my ward is on the stretch of the A1M, so which runs down from Norman Cross down through to Sawtry, takes in some of Holcombe ward as well, which is managed under contract, I think, by DB. Right, so where roads are privately maintained by private contractor, does that fit the same criteria in terms of community engagement?
The honest answer is I don't know. I can take that away and ask them. I would imagine so, because ultimately it's still a national highways road, and so therefore the only difference, frankly, is the contract that it's run under as a design, build, finance, operate DBFO. So my assumption would be that, in answer to your question, yes, but I would have to double check because it's only assumption at this place. But I'm happy to get back to you. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? No. I just thank you, Martin, so much for your presentation. It's been very helpful and very informative.
Does anybody want to ask anything on the wide? I'm happy. While I'm here, it seems a shame not to take the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. I may not have the answers, but I'm happy to take them away if I don't.
I'll bite then. The previous stretch of the A14, which has now become the A1307 in Huntingdon, now has got a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit since it was became no longer the A14. I'm aware there's been delays detrunking the road because the 40-mile-an-hour is there because of the barrier. Would it be possible to get an update about the current status of that?
This is undertaken by our operations directorate, so I'm not involved immediately. But what I can tell you is that the current detrunking of the A1307, I understand, is currently scheduled for December. As you rightly say, the barriers need to be replaced. That is something that Cambridge County Council will be undertaking. My understanding is that when the detrunking takes place, they will do a review of the A1307, and clearly I can't speak on behalf of Cambridge County Council, but my understanding is that they plan to undertake the works in the next financial year.
Councillor Lowe.
Oh, thank you. I was just wondering if there much of an update on the A428, when the works might start for the from Caxton Gibbet to the Black Cat roundabout.
Again, I don't have the very latest information for you, but my understanding is that as with all these things, when we start construction of a project, there's lots of work that goes on behind the scenes before. So you'll be aware of the archaeological work that's been undertaken for some time. There is also some, regarding clearance of vegetation. My understanding is that works properly will start in around about January.
Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you so much for Martin for your time and your thorough report. We really appreciate it.
I'm more than happy to. I think everybody's probably been circulated my statement from yesterday, which has my contact details on it, telephone number. Anybody wants to get in contact with me after this evening, be happy to take any further questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Just to add then that will be circulated to the panel after the meeting along with the presentations from this evening so that you'll have that.
Thank you. So moving on now to item number 5, Council Tax Support Scheme 2024-25. Everyone's, I assume, had a good read of the reports that we were sent. Is Councillor Ferguson going to give us a verbal update? Thank you.
Yes, please, Chair. I'm joined by Katie and Barnes, who will be helping me out. So this is, I think, a really exciting. Well, the World Council Tax Support and Simon aren't usually used in the same sentence, but I think this is a really exciting change to the existing policy on council tax support. So as a reminder, CTS is a means-tested support scheme that reduces the amount of council tax payable by residents on low incomes. There are about 4,000, I think, recipients of council tax support in Huntingdonshire, and the district council has been in charge of administering this support since 2013 when it moved from central government. In that time, we haven't really changed the programme very much. So what it means is the maximum amount of discount that you could get, most people can get if they're on council tax support on their council tax, is about 80% for working age people. If you're a working age person with a child under 5, you can get 85%, and a small number of working age people or who are vulnerable or have children deemed vulnerable can get 100%. But basically, 80% is the most that most people can aim for. So those numbers are pretty meaningless. But if you consider the case of a single person aged 25 in receipt of universal credit, they typically get about £369 a month, which is £85 a month. And from that £85, the district council will basically take £5 off of them, which leaves them with just £80 a week to cover all other living expenses such as food, gas, electricity, water, insurance, and travel expenses, which isn't very much money. Just make the point that this only really, so our discretion in changing these schemes only applies to working age people. We do collect or we do administer council tax support for pensioners, but the government prescribes that scheme, which allows pensioners to get up to 100%. But we have no jurisdiction to change that amount. Clearly, if you're charging an extra £5 to people who are only getting £80 a week, you're going to struggle sometimes to collect that money. These numbers might be a bit out of date, but last time I talked to Katie, the outstanding uncollected amount of council tax from 22-23 for people getting CTS of working age was about £320,000. So you can imagine if you can't afford to pay it, and that the whole process of having to try and collect that money with, reminders and court summons can be really stressful to people who are already in crisis. So that's a real worry. So what we're proposing now is a banded scheme. So 4 different bands based on income and other factors as well. But basically that will allow us, for the people most in need, to give them 100% discount on council tax. And so our modelling done by Barnes over many months suggests that about 96% of current recipients will either receive the same or more support, and some of them will be significantly better off. Not everybody will benefit. So you've seen from the papers that 4% of people might receive or will reduce a reduced level of assistance. For those people, we're proposing a year-long hardship fund, which would help to mitigate that for the first year so people can adjust it. Now, that's the real reason why we're doing this, is to help people in need, but there are other benefits as well. So I'm not sure how much you know about universal credit, but if any of your residents are on universal credit, you'll know that any small changes in income change the amount of universal credit they receive on a weekly or even monthly basis. So about 40% of universal credit claimants have between 8 and 12 changes a year to the amount of universal credit they get, which each time will trigger a letter from district council, change the amount of council tax support they receive as well, which is awful for the residents because, you don't know how much money you've got month to month. And when I start receiving bills every month, in the end, you switch off, don't you, and stop taking notice of them. That equates to a massive admin challenge as well. So I think the team have to process 32,000 changes to council tax support a year, which obviously costs time and money. Lots of it's automated, but it's difficult for everybody. Nobody understands it, and it's a bit of a mess. That's because the scheme that was put in place in 2013 was before universal credit, when people had a more stable kind of benefits criteria. Because of this is not an unusual scheme. So because of this kind of change in universal credit, about 30% of authorities have implemented banded CTS schemes like we're proposing here. We went to consultation over the summer. We had 335 responses, which doesn't seem like a massive amount, but according to the provider we were working with, that's a good response. So, and of those responses, 75% of people were in favour of introducing a proposed scheme, 16% were against, and 9% didn't indicate a preference. We also went out to consultation for all the major preceptors, because obviously, we're not only collecting less money on our behalf, but on their behalf too. Didn't get a great response to that, which we can talk about in a bit. In terms of cost to the district council, it's going to cost us about £70,000 a year, with an extra £44,000 for that first year hardship fund as well. But so it depends on who the preceptors are. The implications for all precepting authorities, if you add it all up, it's about £1 million less a year in collected tax. But of course, that's £1 million in the pockets of people who need it the most. I think it's a brilliant paper written by Katie and the team, but we can discuss it in a minute. But I just wanted to remind you of our corporate plan commitments, which are to prevent crisis, to support people already in crisis, and to deliver good quality, high value for money services with good control and compliance with statutory obligations. And I think this proposal addresses all three of those priorities. Unless I've made any mistakes, Katie, that you want to correct. Not yet, but thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have to agree. It was a very thorough paper and it was a really good thing to read. Really appreciated it. Has anyone got any questions or comments on the paper? Councillor McCadden.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I think quite a few of us here are probably town and parish councillors as well. There is a lot of concern on Huntingdon Town Council at the moment as to how much they may be losing in precepts as a result of this. Have you got anything you can say on that, please?
Hi there. So in terms of the parish and town precepts, the parish and town, parish and town councils aren't subject to the same limits for increases. So if the parish and town council set a precept of say £100,000 a year, they will still be able to do that. The only difference would be is how that's split up amongst a number of households in the district. So in terms of the financial impact, there wouldn't be one necessarily because that whole precept would still be set. We haven't yet worked through the tax base, and that's something that we are undergoing at the moment. So we have to set the tax base every year, and those figures will come out in December. We have already written to all of the parish and town councils to let them know that we're working through this, but we're not able to set that final tax base until the decision on CTS has been made because it will impact. But as soon as we know the actual detail, we will be able to share that.
So further to that as well, just make the point that the consultation process that I talked about, we wrote to all of the preceptors, including town and parish councils, and lots of the parish councils that I represent discussed it. The response wasn't great, but they were invited to respond, and I think the implications were made clear. So if they chose not to do that, like the county council didn't, yeah, I'm afraid that's not now is probably not the time to be making those considerations.
Councillor Corley.
Thank you. And you've partly answered the question I was about to ask, but just for clarity, so what we're saying is there's £1 million that's got to be found. Where's that coming from, ultimately? Assuming that we all want to stay where we're at in terms of our budgets, that means that those who are paying council tax, if I understand it, will be paying more council tax. While I accept the reasons for doing this, and I think it's absolutely laudable that we are doing it, how often, how clear were the parish councils, the town councils, and quite frankly, the council taxpayers of Huntingdonshire, that they're all going to get an increase in their council tax because of this?
That's not my understanding. As you're well aware, the council is funded by various sources, and we have various income streams. The £1 million isn't £1 million for the district council. It's £1 million across all precepting authorities, of which about £700,000 is from the county council, who are the major losers. It's going to cost us about £70,000 in reduced precept as well. I mean, we're not going to put the council tax up for that. We've already going to talk tonight about green bin garden waste subscription services. We're increasing the financial sustainability of the council by doing things like that, increasing a revenue stream so we can spend our resources in the places where it's needed first, which is part of our corporate priorities. So I don't expect it's going to cause an additional increase to council tax. But as we've all seen from the MTFS, those things are pretty much locked in for the future anyway. So we can only raise our council tax by a certain amount. This isn't going to increase the council tax for any district council tax precepts, and unlikely for the county council as well, because the county council will probably be charging the maximum amount of council tax they can apply because of the financial situation.
me just come back now. Excuse me. I totally understand the £1 million is not HDC, but it will be the council taxpayers of Huntingdonshire who are going to have to find this £1 million. Now, I take your point that there'll be savings that we can make, there'll be efficiencies we can make, and who knows what county council might do. But there's still going to be a hefty bill to be paid somewhere, and I just would like us to understand what that could potentially mean for our residents and those who are paying this council tax.
So, I mean, it's £1 million across the whole of the council. If we want to raise £1 million, I can think of better places to raise £1 million than targeting people who are receiving about £80 a week. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Again, we have various income streams. We've got commercial streams. We've got the garden waste subscription service. That's the point of doing these things. So we have money to pay for supporting the residents we need them post. I think going to residents and charging them extra money who can't afford to pay their day-to-day expenses is not only is it detrimental to them, but it puts them even more in crisis. So I think as a district council with our corporate priorities, I wouldn't countenance that, and we will find the money from other places.
And I totally agree with you. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that those individuals that we're seeking to help are having to pay that money. But what I am asking is the rest of us who will be paying our council tax, what is that potentially going to look like? Now, I know we haven't done those worked those figures out, but the sooner we can let our residents know, I think the better.
If I may just come back on that point, when council tax support was first introduced back in 2013, it equated to around 7.55% of our overall yield on council tax across all preceptors. Now, over that time, we've seen the caseload decline, so the amount we're spending is less, and the proportion of council tax overall has come down significantly. So now it's at 5.4% of that overall yield, and the proposals that we're putting forward would bring that up to 5.68%. So it's not a significant increase from the overall yield, even though that figure's there. And in terms of the spend from Cambridgeshire County Council, I think it represents 0.19% of their overall budget. So while it appears a very big number, actually as a proportion of their overall yield, it's actually rather small.
Councillor Hunt?
Thank you. So my eyes kind of lit up when I read this because this will make such a genuinely life-changing difference for the poorest residents in my ward. Myself and Councillor Harvey represent probably one of the most polarised wards in this district. And when I think back to when I'm knocking doors and hearing people on their doorstep saying that they are choosing between heating and eating, this is the genuine life-changing stuff we should be doing here. And this is fundamentally brilliant. And headline 75% approval says it all. You've mentioned and touched on kind of reclamation costs that previously we've been essentially required to run around spending massive sums of money to reclaim not a lot of money off some of the poorest in our kind of area. And might be putting you on the spot slightly, but do you have a rough headline figure of how much is currently spent on council tax reclamation and roughly how much of this could be saved?
Unfortunately, I don't have those figures. We don't tend to segregate the budget for the service in the aspects of billing and recovery. And the challenge of recovering council tax is not only for the current year, but many years previous. So there's a considerable amount of work and it'd be quite difficult to do those sums. What we can say is that for many people that are on a really low income, we still have to make the effort to collect that when we charge it. And if it does end up in court action, that's cost of £70 for somebody. Hence why we're bringing forward to say, is this really right in the current cost of living climate where people are really struggling to pay their bills?
Councillor Shaw?
Thank you. I was surprised to read that Cambridgeshire County Council didn't respond to the consultation, considering they'll have the sort of highest financial impact. Do we have any thoughts on why they may not have responded?
So we reached out to them in various ways. both during the consultation process and after it. Councillor Sanderson also emailed the financial guy, and he said basically that the response we got, which is not a formal response, is that while they don't like the reduction in income, they do support our aims in protecting the most vulnerable people in society, which is one of the county council's objectives. So I guess their decision not to respond was kind of, we don't like it, but we like it. But it is disappointing that they didn't respond, because we'd like to have seen that in the responses. But we tried our hardest, didn't we, Katie?
We did, and the only thing that I would add to that is that there are 100% schemes elsewhere in Cambridgeshire. So 2 other district councils already operate schemes which offer up to 100% for their residents.
Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks to the officers as well. It's nice to meet you in person, Barnes. We've corresponded quite a lot over emails, but never actually met. So, yeah, good paper. Look, I'm not going to repeat the comments. You know, it is a no-brainer. Let's be honest. But I guess what I want to make a plea to the officers and the portfolio holder is very much in relation to our care leavers. You know, I mentor care leavers around not only Huntingdonshire but in other districts, and you know, I just think it's important that, you know, we push them up to the top of the list as well, really, because, you know, these are young people and vulnerable people that we, you know, as a district council should support, really. So that's my only comment to feedback, really.
Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. One of the excuse me, one of the dangers in terms of percentages is we get lost in figures, and we get lost in that real people are at the bottom of this. And one of the percentages I was particularly felt challenged about was the 4%. And I'd like to ask how many people are actually in that 4%. How much reduction are they going to be looking at in terms of their income? And what happens after the first year hardship fund finishes?
So from the modelling that we've done so far, there's a total of 163 current claimants that potentially would have less, 163. Of those, 70 would lose less than £5 per week. The reason generally why people would be worse off is because their income currently is too high to fit into those bands. So the proposals to have an exceptional hardship scheme for a year is to help those transition into the new scheme, but to also give some opportunity for us to help get some engagement with local advice agencies, work through income maximisation, and make sure that those people are using the money in the best way possible. So the intention is to run an application process where they'd sort of come forward with an income and expenditure and allow us that in to really help and provide support for that first year.
Yeah, just to add as well, of those 163, quite a few of those are on legacy benefits, so things like tax credits. And there's what's happening nationally. Obviously, these people are migrating off of those legacy benefits onto universal credit. As that happens, and that process is underway now and should be completed by the end of 2024. As that happens, those people may well, some of these losers may well fall more favourably under the rules of our new scheme, because universal credit is made up of different elements, and our scheme will disregard certain elements. So they may have a lower assessed income, before we then place their situation in a band. So they may well come out more favourably as we move through the next sort of 12, 18 months. Just to make that point.
Can I just say that also, I mean, we haven't changed this for 13 years. It doesn't mean we can't change it again. And I guess what we'll do is we'll try and monitor these things and see how much impact it has, or how much negative impact and how much positive impact as well. So we can come back to you in a year's time, or a year after it's been in place, and we can have a discussion about that and see if we need to make further changes. I think it's much easier to tweak these things once they're in place than it has been for this process starting from scratch.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, you've almost answered my question. So, as I understand it, of those 163, potentially at the end of that year, we've supported them through the hardship fund, they may well then qualify because of the different movements. What happens to those who might not, that doesn't happen to? I mean, are we going to run the hardship scheme beyond 1 year? Is it something that will always be there to help, or what is the plan?
So the proposal currently is a hardship scheme for 1 year. As Stephen's rightly said there, that's something that we would keep under review. I think we need to perhaps monitor this over the first few months and actually see which cases we get, what kind of help that people need in those individual circumstances. And if we do need to look to extend at that point, then we'd need to bring a paper back about how we provide that support. The only thing I would say is that we can't change a scheme, but also run another scheme to keep people in line all of the time. So at some point we may need to look at how we deal with that. But it's one of those things that we probably can't say today, but we certainly would monitor.
Yeah, I'm reassured to hear that it's not just the first year, because you're right. We just don't know what that will look like at the end of the first year, and I'd hate to think there's, say, 50 of those people's then in a on the street, as it were. So thank you.
Have we any other comments or questions? And Councillor Ferguson?
Can I just thank the officers? When I was first got this portfolio role, I think in November last year, Barnes and Liz and I sat in a room over there and looked. Barnes had his spreadsheet out and looked at about 100 different parameters we could tune. Yeah, and it looked back then it was going to be a really difficult job to get this through the process, to get a scheme out to consultation, through the scrutiny process at all. Then we had our Revs and Ben's manager take early retirement at Christmas as well. And when did you start, Katie? March. And so at that stage, I was thinking we're not going to manage to do this as well. So it's taken lots of hard work. It's quite a difficult and complex subject, but I think the paper is very illuminating, very well written. And I'm very proud of the scheme. So thank you to the officers for all your hard work.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I agree. It's been a really good paper to read, and I'm really excited for this scheme. I think most of us, everyone here, I think, is very excited about it. Thank you. So moving on to our next agenda item 6, transfer of public open spaces. I think we've got Neil and Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. So we've got this very robust policy here, and the policy is about the process needed to deal with the request to take ownership lease of HDC open spaces. This is over 1/4 of an acre in size. We have had previous requests which have been quite complicated. We literally had no policy to follow. So this hasn't, not having a policy, it's not given us the opportunity to progress with anything that's come to us. This will be HDC's protocol, which will enable a consistent and swift resolution, the decision making of any of the proposals that come to us. I do believe that this policy demonstrates HDC's will to work closely with other authorities or even communities that have a proposal to come to us. It's in line with our corporate plan, which is to do enable and influence. So I'd be really pleased with comments from the panel on this policy.
So has anyone any comments or questions about it? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I'm just going to go in with a daft question because I'm good at daft questions. So I'm right in saying that it's a generic policy and it doesn't stipulate any specific parcels of land. It's just an open policy, as you say, in case something happens in the future. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Yes, it's not a stupid question at all. Yes, it is a policy and a procedure, which means that we can deal with these things in a quick and efficient manner. We can look at it at an outline business case level to see if there's any merit. If there is then merit, we would then invest further resources with the people making the proposal to then develop it in detail. These matters can get quite complicated depending upon how the council ended up having the land. So the planning powers effectively that might have meant that we owned it. There can be certain conditions and covenants on land as well. So all of that research is required. And even after that research, we might come up against an obstacle or not. So it can be very simple and it can be complicated. So it's worth just taking a look first at that level. So yes, it's a standard process, and it just requests any applicants to just set out the basis of why they'd like to do it. Because if there is merit, then we should look at it.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Orban.
Thank you, Chair. On page 70, just to clarify, if I may, it's not to ordinarily seek or pursue transfer. Is my understanding correct that this is just to set the policy, like Councillor Shaw said, and we don't actually go out and actively offer them to third parties, but we just have a policy when someone comes to us? And thank you, that's nice and clear. And then through you, Chair, on page 74, a lease or a license is preferred. Could you just expand a bit on that, please, as to why a lease is preferred to sort of assigning freehold?
Thank you, Councillor Alban. It's very simple for the council to offer a license or a lease on its land because we retain the ownership. The complexity is where you look at transferring the ownership because of the powers and the reasons for which the district council holds the land in the first place. And that then encompasses research, investigation, a legal process of transfer, not dissimilar to a house transfer, but just with some other twists and turns of local authority in there. A lease and a transfer can be arranged and agreed. It offers no impediment to the third party. It reduces the cost for everybody involved. It's swifter. So therefore, if there's a really good community idea and they would like to take a lease, that then allows them to progress an initiative or attract further funding that the district council couldn't on its own. We all know town councils have some opportunities perhaps that district councils don't in terms of attracting funding. So it offers a very quick and easy way of looking at securing the benefits. The other benefit of retaining title is that the district council can make sure that any proposal fits with what the district council would want to see. Whereas if you then look at transferring it, you're then looking at legal remedy to control it in the future. And as time passes, those legal remedies get less, like covenants, etc. Some are in perpetuity, but we can't claim as much back sometimes. So that's why a lease or a license is better, because you get all the benefits with none of the pain.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really, really thorough, concise answer, and it's made it very clear. Through you, thank you.
Councillor Bywater.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Neil, it was a good report, actually. I just want to say thank you, really, because there's a flow chart and it makes it so much easier to understand. And being serious, I think we need to make this available, not hidden down behind loads of documents in the minutes and a paper, so that it's easy to find. That way, it'll be easier for us to signpost anybody who comes forward. Really, that would be my plea. Really.
Yes, I agree. It fills the gap of a policy that was definitely needed and it's very well written. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I think since I became, I got in this position of portfolio holder, I've had a couple of requests and we just didn't know where to go with these requests. We were just like, what do we do? We need something that shows us where we can go, when someone comes to us with these requests. And absolutely, you as members can take that to your local authorities or your parish or towns and say, well, actually, look, we've got this. There is opportunities. There is an application form that will be developed, and we're not saying no. Let's take it through the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And for me, it also highlights to the community groups the availability of applying for the leases, for instance, so they can take some ownership of land as well or apply for it. So any other questions or comments? Councillor Shaw.
So these potential parcels of land, presumably there'd only be parcels of land that don't benefit HDC's goals, for example, biodiversity or whatever. My only slight concern looking at it, would any of these parcels of land be sold for a quick buck, if you know what I mean, for housing developments and stuff like that? Or is it just going to be kept within the communities and for projects that would benefit those communities?
So this policy relates to open spaces and generally the use of open spaces and investment of facilities on open spaces. The council has two existing policies for land use for sale and also for disposals. For a council, there are certain rules that have to be followed for the disposal of land for sale. It has to be declared as surplus, and there's a process to go through to do that. And so our estates team are involved in that policy and procedure. So this policy sits alongside those, the three of them together. And this one very much deals with the open space side of things. If it was land that was surplus that could be usefully used for something else, then the district council can choose to sell land. But again, there's a legal process to follow and certain requirements, etc., which are set out in those policies, which they're referenced in this policy as well. So they all work together. So in answer to your question, this policy would not allow that. It would have to go through other routes and it would have to be surplus. For us, anything that's open space, we want to protect biodiversity. We want to protect the land. It provides valued health and well-being benefits to our community as well as nature. So part of the reason for us wanting to retain it and possibly look at leases if people want to do something different or enhance it, that's the right option to do.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much, Neil and Councillor Taylor, for your answering our questions, and we should look forward to seeing this paper coming through. So finally, our final item is Garden Waste Subscription Service implementation update. I think we've got Liz and Councillor Hassel going to present to us.
So thank you, Chair. As I think we agreed at previous the combined Overview and Scrutiny Committee that we put together to look at this this project, that we would give you regular updates on the implementation once the project was approved. So the project's now approved. I would at this point like to say a huge thank you to the officers who have been working on this. As you know, this has been a challenging project. It was called in, and that caused delays to the project. And yeah, I'd just like to thank those officers who behind the scenes have worked diligently to actually bring the project on track. And I think I'm just about to hand over to Liz, who will talk you through what has happened over the preceding weeks and months since then. And just to emphasize that when we did the engagement was dictated by the attendees and not the officers. So a lot of time was spent officers out of time, working at weekends and the evenings and so on and so forth. So big thank you from me. Anyway, I'm just now going to hand over to Liz.
Thank you, Councillor Hassel. If I may, and you may indulge me, if I go through the slides first and then take questions at the end, because I appreciate you haven't seen all of this, so I'll talk through it a bit and then very happy to take questions. So if I could have the next slide, please. So, as Councillor Hass has already said, we've come back with an update on the engagement sessions that were undertaken. It was a key part of our strategy of our project delivery. So, this slide here just gives an overview of the scope, the breadth of town and parish councils that attended the session. So, there'll be a little bit more detail about what we did. But there's 32 separate town and parish councils that were represented, which is a fantastic result in terms of the breadth of representation for the residents, and 58 people. So our sessions were only 1 hour. They were, as you can see on the bottom right there, a span of different days of the week, different times of the day. We did an evening session, we did a Sunday session in the afternoon. All were pretty well attended. Sunday was maybe a bit light, maybe half a dozen people, but still it met the needs of the people that wanted to attend. So we were very happy as officers to be able to shape the schedule to allow the maximum number of attendees. The way we ran them were all online sessions. There was, I'll be honest, maybe a little bit of user error in using Teams. So we had maybe 1 or 2, but we did our absolute damnedest to be able to get them to join. And we ran the sessions as teams. We then had breakout sessions with facilitators to be able to ask some specific questions, to have those specific dialogues, and then come back together again to sort of recap on the level of discussion. So we covered a number of areas. We talked about what information gaps, i.e. FAQs, might be required for residents. We talked about communication channels. We talked about those people on lower incomes or the ones that would need the greatest level of support across our district. Next slide, please. We also, and these on the left-hand side will be familiar to you, these are our sort of community initiatives. So we took the opportunity, and this was very much a key part of our engagement, to talk through these initiatives and try and understand what sort of level of traction they would have with the town and parish councils. As well as having the conversations in the room, we also had it as an online survey. So some people that attended were then able to then pass that on. We sent it out to all of the chairs and clerks of the parish and town councils. We had only 14 respondents, but I think that's still good because we had a really rich discussion as well. So there's the sort of qualitative and quantitative analysis of all of those schemes that we proposed. You will see from the top, not unsurprisingly, because it starts with the word free, that free compost was 50% positive. And you'll see on the right-hand side what we're planning to do about that. No point asking people what they think and prioritise the initiatives if we're not going to do anything. So we've got Compost Awareness Week, who knew, 5th of May, and we're going to use that as the opportunity to, I believe Operations Heidi Waste Minimisation Team have done this before. I think they've parked up in various places and given out free compost. So we'll use that as the benchmark. They'll be doing a big push at the beginning of May. See what the uptake is. We've got in our financial model, we've got allowance in the budget for more than just 1 week. So if there is a demand, then we'll be able to expand that out, but we'll do that as the test bed. Community compost schemes was very high on the list as well. This isn't something that we're naturally going to actually facilitate. It's more about being able to surface the case studies and make the connections, because it's going to be predominantly run for and by the community. So we can make those connections between people through the use of case studies and information on the website, but we're not planning on putting a huge amount of officer resource into connecting people. Saturday freighters, again, is one of the things that we've had much debate about. A popular, as you can imagine, initiative. So I've got some more details which I can talk to as well if people have got questions about the Saturday freighters. But this is something that Andy has looked at considerably over the last 6-8 months and got a schedule of a 4-week rota, with a view that we will actually review that after the first 6 months after the season, if you like, April to September, when it's going to be the biggest demand on that, and then use that data to then analyse whether it's something that we wish to continue, whether the uptake is significant enough. Subsidised home composters, there is already a county council offer which is buy one get one free. A lot of the narrative from the session was about, actually I might not have space for 2, and which is a fair comment. So we're looking at the Strata, the current provider of the composting scheme for county, looking at whether we can basically get a subsidised first bin. There's other options as well that we can look at. we've sort of conflated the sort of penultimate and the third from bottom one, which was Councillor Lowe's suggestion about land management, and also the offer that we originally had, which was about parish councils having bins, free bins that they could allocate. Not unsurprisingly, they were a little bit reticent without any particular criteria about how they would distribute those bins. So giving it a basis of actually identifying people that were prepared and willing to do sort of the communal space land management, they felt much happier with that. Actually there would be criteria that they could use and it wouldn't be a subjective sort of decision. So we're looking at how we can build a scheme around that. So that's what Heidi's looking at the moment. And then the local businesses sponsoring bins that could equally be used was not met with a huge amount of enthusiasm. But that was the findings of the results. So we'll and again, like I say, I'm happy to take questions on any of those initiatives afterwards. If I could have the next slide, please. We also asked some more sort of peripheral questions than just the initiatives. So, and I've just obviously highlighted there again which were the highest proportion. We did ask about whether people had town and parish council councillors had received adequate information. The majority was no, but equally there was over a third that said yes, and predominantly that was through the network of communication with their ward councillor and how they'd felt supported through that and the information exchange that they'd had. No surprises that the impact is likely to be large. The most common impact was around fly tipping, without a doubt, and Andy said many times in these meetings that actually the data doesn't support, from other local authorities who collect garden waste, doesn't support a peak in fly tipping, but we have a very sort of mature operations unit which is very good at being able to monitor those instances. So again, the data will be determining whether or not we need to take remedial action about any high levels of fly tipping. I'm sort of confident that Andy's all over that because that's part and parcel of the day job. So that's that is clearly addressed through our FAQs. And again, this gives us a bit of an insight into where our focus communication needs to go out as well to our residents. The particular groups as well, it won't surprise you to know around those that are, digitally excluded, if I could ever say that phrase, and low income / they were sort of conflated together, the low income and elderly. And again, this is something that we've talked about. We had the equality impact assessment that identified a number of different schemes. So Councillor Ferguson's already mentioned the council tax support scheme for those that are on lower incomes. We've also got the residents advice and information service to be able to look at other ways that those households can be supported through other routes of income. And there's existing offers that we have through operations around sharing bins, which we'll obviously make a big point of as well. And then finally, the killer question: are there any examples of good practice that you know of that could be considered when designing and developing the garden waste scheme? Wasn't a lot of huge other ideas, so 71% of people saying no. So I feel like we haven't missed a trick, hopefully. So the output of all of those sessions, those 58 people and the 14 online respondents, we're putting together a handbook. I think Heidi did this magic trick where she pulled one out of the drawer, which was a hard copy that is probably about 15 years old. So we've used that, clearly plagiarized that a little bit, but the content of which pretty much covers everything that I've talked about. So some of the findings of the engagement, more information around those initiatives, and I think we're at about 45, nearly 50 FAQs as well. One of the things that parish councillors, wanted was, how do I support my residents? What information can I give them? How can I answer their questions? Absolutely legitimate. So, I'd rather give them more than less. And we will constantly review those FAQs through the information that we get through our customer services teams about if there are any questions that are being frequently asked through calls, and then we can adapt and amend our FAQs and enhance them. And we've also got the commitment that we will continue with our sort of communication network with town and parish councils. We've had a really good response and a really good positive dialogue with them, so we will continue to use that. So some of the project team will be using some of our generic, if you like, out for residents communication and being able to use our email distribution list that we've got for parish and town councils and give them a paragraph or so that they can then put into their local newsletters. We will be, using that as an additional communication network when we go out with messages through social media, through our website. All of those sorts of campaigns will also be following it up in exactly the same way with our town and parish councillors, so that they'll be getting it from all angles, I imagine. Next slide, please. So our marketing campaign, this is not directly related to the engagement, but has helped us sort of structure this. What we will be doing when we go out in December, so November is just building, a lot of our collateral, as you can imagine. We're fairly close to finishing that off. December is when we go out for our early bird offer. We will be sending out the information about the initiatives at the same time. What we don't want is people potentially to feel a little bit duped into subscribing into a garden bin, and then a month, 2 months later, we say, oh, there's a Saturday Freeter and there's a free composting scheme. And then they feel that actually they didn't have full receipt of all of the offers that were available from the district council at the same time. So the reason why we're pushing hard on the initiatives at the moment is so that we can meet that deadline of being able to go out with the details of the initiatives at the same time as we go out for the early bird offer. So you can see there, as was in the report, £50 for an annual subscription, and we are fixing the price of £50 per annum for a minimum of 3 years if you are a direct debit customer, for obvious reasons, not just the fact that it's a lower price when we get the subscriptions in early, but also it secures a funding stream, a sustainable funding stream that is the purpose of the scheme. That runs from 1st of December until the 31st of January. And then we move into February and March, which will be the standard price, £57.50 for the bin and £30 for the additional bin. And you'll recall from the last time we were here, the reason for doing the early bird is because we need time to be able to start understanding and analysing the impact on routes. So by having an enticement to be able to get people to sign up earlier, it allows Andy the opportunity to get a critical mass of subscription numbers that then can be scheduled and planned for routes, so he knows crews, vehicles, where those routes are, and allows us enough time, as you can see in March, about any changes to routes that we can go out with the comms and give residents time to be able to understand what that impact is. Garden Waste subscription service goes live on the 1st of April, as you know, and then it says June onwards. I think it's probably likely to be even later than June onwards, is the collection of the unwanted garden bins. One, because we've got enough going on in comms wise about the changes to the service, but particularly the data that Andy has suggests that about 50% of people sign up after the initiation of the service, so after the 1st of April. So it may be that customers want to subscribe. If they have an additional bin already, they've got 2 bins, they may only want to pay for 1. They'll have the second bin still in their property, which we won't collect. As they move through that season, it may be that they actually think, do you know what, I am going to need 2 after all. So for us, there's no benefit in the logistics of collecting too early and then delivering back again. So there's a very purposeful reason to basically hold on, if people can, hold on to their unwanted bins until we've gone through a sort of 3-month period after the launch, so that we know that the ones that we're collecting are definitely the ones that are unwanted. Next slide, please. So this is my final one. This just gives you a bit of an overview around the support that we're offering to our residents, as well as just, here you go, sign up here. We've got an additional 5 other customer services advisors coming into post. So we are close to getting 4 in now, in readiness for that sort of comm starting to go out in November. So they are specifically around taking calls for the change in service, garden waste subscription service, with a routing. Don't ask me the technology. People in customer services can talk about it much better than I can, which allows us to streamline the calls as well for the general operatives, and pick up the green bins calls quicker and easier. The customer services advisors, going back to those cohorts of people and residents in our areas that potentially are the most impacted. Digital inclusivity was one of them. So our customer services advisors will be able to take the transaction on the phone for people, or if they walk in, they'll be able to do that for them for both a card payment and a direct debit payment. So none of the those at risk, if you like, populations will they won't miss out on the early bird discount. They'll still be equally able to access that £50 or the £50 with a direct debit for 3 or more years. There are some complex inquiries. Some schools have gazillions of bins, it seems, and there are some communal bin locations. They may well be in your ward areas. So anything that is sort of outside our sort of main stakeholder groups, we're writing to them and basically being able to offer them an additional level of support, and they will go basically through to the waste minimisation team. There's no value in them going through customer service front end. We'll just route them back to the back office, and then we'll be able to support them more just by the nature of the fact that they've got loads of bins. And also for any councillors that are here that are existing direct debit customers, you will be receiving a letter. One of the things that we are keen not to do is touch anybody's financial personal data. So on the basis of that, if you are an existing direct debit customer, you will be asked to re-register. You will be asked to put in your bank details, because the risk to us as an organisation of moving between systems. So we have a new direct debit system, which is an automated system. For obvious reasons, we don't want to be touching that, moving it around in any way. So the change in service allows us to invite our current customers to benefit from the early bird discount, and they will have to key in their details, but it's a much safer way of being able to manage it. And then we have that new cohort of everybody onboarding at the same time. That's pretty much everything from me. So the last slide says any questions, so I'm happy to take questions.
Just before we move into questions, can I just ask councillors, because there might be quite a lot of questions, that you stick to maybe 2 questions each, and if someone's already made the comment you want to make, not to repeat the comment, so we're not here forever. Thank you. I saw Councillor Lowe's hand up.
Thank you. With the payments, are they going to be taken in one lump sum? Because obviously some people can't afford or have a spare 50 quid in a month, or even for the 57.50. Is there going to be opportunities to pay monthly by direct debit?
We did look at that, but actually what we need is the cash flow up front, and so the only option is a one payment. There aren't any instalment payments. What we need is the opportunity for people to subscribe. I know it could be for those people that are on lower incomes more of a challenge, but we are confident that actually there are other solutions available to them. One of the other issues that having paying by installments is it's an annual service. So it spans over the year. If you renege on any of your installment payments, then there's a significant administration overhead about chasing. I mean, going back to CTS, chasing those payments, making sure that you've got the full amount to be able to pay for the annual service as well. So our view and is replicated pretty much across, I think, about 80-90% of the other local authorities that charge, is that you just take one payment. I think Peterborough do something where they do 3 payments, but it's within the first 3 months. But again, it's really messy and it's confusing for customers, if I'm really honest as well. So we're just going for one payment and basically making the one annual payment.
Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions and a comment, if you'll indulge me. The comment on your marketing plan I thought was great in terms of that comms plan. Just one thought, and I think you said it, but I wasn't sure. Just before it goes live, is it worth including in that communication a reminder to those people who may not have subscribed that in fact your bin's not going to be collected next time round, sort of thing? I think because as sure as eggs is eggs, somebody will stick the bin out and then you'll have a phone call saying, "Why have to collect my bin?" So that's just my comment. Question: fly tipping, and I totally get that. And remember Andy sitting here and telling us the data doesn't support that. I'll have to believe him. What can we do, therefore, to make sure that we get that message across consistently? Because, again, it's something I hear time and time again in parish council. I think we need to maybe do something to help people, and it may be an ongoing conversation we have with them. But anything we can do this. So that's my question. What can we do? You may not have an answer tonight, but take it back to Andy, perhaps.
So yes, so in terms of I'll go to your first comment. In terms of our key messaging, at the very beginning of our campaign, our key messaging is actually around subscription numbers, for obvious reasons. As we move through the period of early bird and as we get further towards March time and we've got a better idea of the numbers, then actually, as you say, our key messaging flips in our marketing campaign into an understanding not just about changes of routes, but potentially as well about if you haven't subscribed, then your bin will not be collected, but there'll be bin hangers as well, in the same way as if there's an issue with contamination in the bins, and the bin men will put hangers on. If there are bins left out that we know in our system, and I think we explained there's in-cab technology which shows which of those households have subscribed, then there will be bin hangers that hang on the bins to say, if you wish to subscribe, here's a QR code, scan it or phone this number. So that's part of the key messaging. In terms of fly tipping, I think we definitely can do more. And again, we will be all of our communication and all of our FAQs and all of our support for our customer services and to our parish councils will be driven by the data as well. So we have, we have quite a rich source of information coming through from customer services which we will be tracking. I think the point that's whatever it was, 71% or so around fly tipping says to me exactly that, about we cannot be complacent. We know it's an issue that, without wishing to sound condescending, is perceived to happen. And if the data doesn't support that, then we need to be very proactive about going out with that data to demonstrate that the trends of fly tipping over that period, when from the 1st of April onwards, have not tracked as expected. So yes, we can certainly incorporate that into other key messages that we run through the scheme.
My second question, just for clarification, unwanted bin collection. I seem to remember in part of the conversations, those who don't subscribe can still hang on to the green bins, or if we change our approach on that?
No, if anybody wants to convert their bin into a composter, then they absolutely can do. We have a bin management form. Sounds horrendous, but basically it's the opportunity for you to record whether you wish to have your bin collected, withdrawn, if you like. So we will be asking customers whether they wish their bin to be come back in repurposed. If they choose not to, then they can keep the bin. They can, I don't know, use it for whatever they like. But we will, again, Heidi's got YouTube clips of all sorts that actually show how you can convert your bin into a composter to save you having to do that. So yes, you can keep it. You don't have to return it.
Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Good report, very helpful with that common strategy. I'm just trying to think ahead and be not too cynical about it, but when we go past the go live date, I'm just concerned about having a plan in place for. I'm thinking about some of the properties that have a high turnover of rented accommodation, have a high turnover of tenants or owners, where they don't subscribe to the bin and the bins just get abandoned. Are we going to have a contingency plan to have those potentially abandoned bins collected? Because they could be just hanging around the street there. I'm just thinking about rented accommodation, particularly where the tenant leaves and the bin's just abandoned and no one accepts ownership of it. Is there a contingency plan for someone to go around and collect abandoned bins potentially?
That's a very good point. And that is one that I think I will absolutely take back to Andy. I don't know. It will, in our system, there is an allocation of the number of bins per household. So there will be an allocation in our system that says that there is a bin there, whether it's a rental or not, but there will be an allocation because it will be as part of building the route, understanding how many crews and how many vehicles we need. So we know where the bins are. I'm going to assume, and I don't want to speak for Andy because I'm sure there'll be some technology and some sort of analysis behind it, but there is a slight we only know what people tell us when we come to this subscription. So if there are known high levels like the communal areas as well as rented accommodation, that we know where those bins are, and we haven't heard anything, I would assume that actually there'll be a sort of default that says if we've heard nothing, rather than a positive engagement to say we remove the bin, that those then would be flagged after a certain period of time and be then part of the scheme, if you like, for the collection, even if it hasn't been a conscious decision to, book in to have it removed. We do know where they are, so we could go and collect them. But I'm sure Andy will give you a much more technical response, and I'm very happy to ask him.
I'm just thinking of a way, because it'll be us as members who get the emails from residents saying there's 3 bins in this street, they're loafing around, who's going to collect them? I just think we need to have a process in place to be able to handle that.
So I think it's a really good point. So what my mind immediately leapt to when you said that, Councillor Bywater, was anyone remember the abandoned shopping trolley helpline? So it's perilously close, but I think it's a really good example of bringing something like this back and a really practical consideration that hadn't been thought of. So as Liz has already outlined, there is resource available to collect bins. So it's just about targeting that in a way. So I think that relationship with local councillors, where they can flag those areas of high risk, and we can use some of that resource to go and do sweeps in that area, I think will be absolutely something we can take away and look to build upon.
Councillor Lowe, then Councillor Orban.
Thank you. What will happen to the bins that are collected? Are they going to be recycled? You mentioned repurposed, because I'm just concerned, don't want loads of plastic bins laying around.
And again, I don't profess to be the general manager of operations. My understanding from Andy is that those that can be repurposed and recycled back into the system will absolutely do so. I imagine that there is a certain level of detriment that happens to a plastic bin anyway, so it will have a lifetime of, I don't know, whatever length of time it is, and there will be a natural attrition whereby people that have been in their properties for a certain long amount of time will be renewing their bins anyway, because they'll be beyond usability. So however that disposal process works, I imagine will be the ones that actually can't be recycled back into people who are then signing up further on as well. I can provide more details again. Just I know you all know this. The purpose for coming here was being able to talk about the engagement and our work with the town and parish councils. I am very, very happy to take questions back for Andy around the operational side of things if there are still questions. Please don't think I'm dodging the question.
Councillor Orban.
Thank you, Chair. I think tonight has proved why it was right to call this in. We need to have lots of scrutiny of what's going on. I think this is one of the biggest changes to the district council, and I think some of the questions that have been raised tonight and that were raised at the 2 joint scrutiny meetings have brought out things that perhaps hadn't been thought of. And I particularly welcome the response to the point I made at one of the last joint scrutiny meetings of engaging with the parishes, even though some of the 14 respondents weren't that many. As you say, we had a good turnout from the parishes. One suggestion, if it's not already been thought of, rather than do hangers twice, could the new arrangements be incorporated in the Christmas hangers if there's enough room?
Already heading towards the printers. So yes, I lovingly refer to it as a bit of a Brucey bonus because of the timing of this. We've got a sunk cost for the operations team, where they are already doing bin hangers for the Christmas routes on the other side for everybody, and we put it on the grey bins because universally the grey bins are the ones that are put out around that time rather than putting it on the garden bins. So the decision is that the bin hangers will be on the grey bins so they are literally going to print from today's meeting that we had, and they will be in circulation. I think it's the 27th of November or thereabouts, but in the normal cadence and frequency that those bin hangers go out, and on the other side it will say about the early bird discount.
Thank you, Chair. My second question, that's reassuring. Sorry to nick Councillor Burke's question. Great minds think alike, as the old saying goes. Could we just go back to the slide where it says about the 3-year direct debit? I just wanted to get clarification on that. It may be it's one of those things that could be, depending whether we're left-sided, right-sided, we could look at the same thing and read it different ways. Are we asking people to commit for 3 years and keep paying the direct debit, or are we giving them a £50 a year reduced rate if they say they're going to do it, and what happens if they move? That's what I want the clarification on, please. Thank you, Chair.
So the £50 per year for the direct debit customers are those that sign up in the period from December to January and basically do not cancel their direct debit thereafter. Anybody cancelling their direct debit afterwards would then be expected to subscribe to the normal £57.50. So if you like, it's a little bit of a golden handcuff for being able to ensure that, or as much as we can, because people will invariably cancel direct debits, and we will obviously be monitoring it. It's one of the metrics that Andy and Heidi monitor on an annual basis. I think the cancellation rate around direct debits is around 4%. It's not massive. So again, it's related to being able to have that enduring direct debit once it's set up. So a lot of the work that we've done over September and October and frantically doing testing now is around introducing an automated direct debit service. Corporately, we don't have it other than specifically in the council tax scheme system, but we don't have anything corporately that allows us to be able to do an automated direct debit. If you sign up for a direct debit for the current scheme at the moment, you get a form, you fill out your form, you send it back, it goes to the bank, blah, blah, blah. So, beads of sweat and all the rest of it when you're trying to introduce a new IT system. But the automation process is there so that once you've signed up, notifications about what your direct debit payment will all be via email. So sort of the criteria for being able to pay by direct debit is you have to have a live email address because we need to be able to communicate with you. But we've put deliberately for a minimum of 3 years. It may be that, as we go through, and let's be really honest, as we go through the district council elections and beyond those 3 years, it may be something that is in perpetuity for whichever administration is in place. But that's why we've sort of set it for a minimum of 3 years to allow for that variance of ensuring that we've got the financial stability and endurance of the £50 and tying those customers in. But like I say, if they do cancel, so it's not by person, if you like, it's about setting themselves up in the system. Does that help?
Yeah, just to add to Liz's point here, and I'm sure, Liz, if you can confirm that I've got this right, this facility, although it's being used for the garden waste subscription service, is an automated facility that we could use for other things as well. So you're just in the project, it has wider benefits.
Anybody else with comments or questions? Councillor Shaw.
It was just to sort of expand on Councillor Bytle's excellent comment regarding abandoned bins. I think perhaps it might be worth considering what would happen if bins are full and customers don't want to subscribe to the service because presumably the council won't collect a full bin for repurposing. I think it'd be worth considering some sort of contingency plan for what might happen then.
So our FAQs are actually really clear. We can only recollect, if you like, or reclaim back empty bins. So as much as we will have, a lot of key messaging before the changeover date for the 1st of April about if you have not subscribed, your bin will not be collected. There will, also be, which means if it's full, I suggest you put it out pretty quickly before the 1st of April. It will be about the messaging, absolutely. But there's the binmen will not collect a full garden bin.
And just to be really clear, so Councillor Shaw, this is really quite a high-tech collection service. It's all driven by in-cab technology. So almost if you aren't registered on that system, we won't collect it. It's not like they're going down the street looking for bins that are put out. So exactly as Liz says, it wouldn't be picked up.
Any other comments or questions? I'll just make a comment. I think the early bird. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if we've identified any sites yet that are suitable for the Saturday freighters.
Bear with me just a second. So, like I say, Andy had done a lot of this beforehand. So I do have, which again will be part of the pack, and I'm very happy to share. So unfortunately, I don't have it on the slide, but if you're okay, I can read to you. So it's a 4-week cycle, and this is based on. So what Andy's put here is it's a 6:30 to 1 p.m. between the months of April and September. So 6 months, arranged for a 26-ton waste collection vehicle to be situated in some pre-designated areas in the district where residents could visit and deposit garden waste material. So there'd be staff, so they'd be able to manage and load it. So I think they come with bins, and then the resident brings their receptacle. It gets put into the bin because the bin is the only way to load it into the vehicle. Exactly. And it says very clearly areas have been identified based on geographical spread along with the availability of parking for an HGV, which I think Andy's made really clear as well. We can't just pull up on the side of the road. So for week 1, it says Yaxley, Stilton, Saltree, and One Leisure at Ramsey. Week 2, high-rise car park at St Ives, One Leisure Outdoor Centre at Burgess Hall. Week 3, Eastfield, One Leisure in Huntingdon, Godmanchester Yard and Riverside Car Park. And then week 4, Catworth Lay-by, Tilbrook Lay-by, Paxton Pits, Riverside Car Park, One Leisure St Neots. So they're not just within the town centres. There are some that go peripheral to that. But again, the criteria being is you've got to be able to get a 26-ton vehicle. One of the things that did come up in the engagement discussions was about, well, what if I wish to have a Saturday freighter? So we are looking at potentially ways that could possibly be included in the rounds, but we've literally, given that the engagement sessions and some of the work through of these initiatives are still being tested for viability, still looking at how that would work. But at the moment we've got 4, 7, 11, 16 sites on a 4-week cycle that would be part of the scheme of Saturday freighters that Andy's already sort of designated.
And just heading off the preemptive question, which is my area is not covered in that, I'm going to be a bit more expansive than Liz on the option we're looking at for those areas where they're just not suitable for a freighter. So we are still working it through, but one of the propositions we're looking at is offering to parish councils the opportunity to have some of those reclaimed bins that aren't being used by others, that they could then host at their site. And use to allow the community to come put into those on predefined days. So, for instance, Great Gidding, Parish Hall could have 4 bins. We'd agree that we'd collect those 4 bins as part of the regular cycle of green waste collection through Great Gidding. And we'd effectively publish a similar list to what we've done for freighters, so that those areas still have an equivalent service, albeit not a kind of freighter-driven service. And we'd just do that in the general bin collection week. So hopefully that gives you a kind of flavour for the response to those kind of challenges. And for those of you in rural areas, I'm sure that'll be one of the questions you get asked. So we're still finalising it, but that's the plan.
Councillor Hassel, did you want to make a comment?
No, I'm actually fine now. I think Oliver is just very aptly discussed that one.
Councillor McAdam.
Yeah, just to be absolutely clear, I'm not quite sure I totally understood what was said about the early bird before, but yeah, it's a 3-year agreement and £50 per year. And if you come out of it, you'll have to pay the £57.50. But if I came out of it after a year, this is what I don't quite understand. Would I have to then pay the previous year's £7.50 on top? Yeah.
So no is the short answer. So for some customers, and it's about 2/3 of our customers for the additional bins are on a direct debit scheme, but 1/3 of them are on cards. So if it's a card payment, you would just pay the £50 for this year, and then subsequent years you would pay the £57.50. If you're a direct debit customer, then it could be enduring, but if you then you wouldn't have to pay the differential of £7.50.
Sorry, again, just to make it absolutely clear, when you sign up for the early bird, you are not signing up for 3 years. But whilst you are a member for at least 3 years, if you are a member for 3 years, you'll pay £50 every single year. So there's no long-term commitment. You could sign up for the early bird and pay £50 and cancel after a year. That would be fine. But, you don't have to pay 150, you just pay £50 for as long as you're a member, and you're locking in that price. That's the deal.
I think it's genius. I shall be signing up for it. Any other questions or comments? In that case, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Councillor Hassel, for your contributions and answering the questions. And in that, our meeting's now closed. Thank you for your comments and contributions.